The courtroom smelled like recycled air and fear. Diane Holloway had been in enough bad situations to recognize that smell. It came off the other prisoners in waves, thick and sour. But Diane just stood there with her hands bound, studying the alien judges like they were wildlife she might need to understand later. Counselor Brith, a tall insectoid with clicking mandibles and forearms folded across his chest, read from a glowing screen. His voice buzzed when he spoke, like a wasp trapped in a jar. Diane Holloway, human, age 34, former wilderness survival instructor. You are charged with inciting unauthorized planetary evacuation, interference with corporate territorial rights, and disruption of licensed mining operations. Diane said nothing. She had led 200 colonists off a dying planet when the mining company refused to evacuate them. The air filters were failing. Children were getting sick. She did what needed doing. The Galactic Commerce Authority has found you guilty on all counts, Brith continued. You're sentenced to 15 years on the penal world Moorhaven 6. The prisoners around her gasped. Someone started crying. A large reptilian alien too rose back, made a sound like choking. Diane had never heard of Moorhaven 6, but the reactions told her everything she needed to know. That Brith's compound eyes fixed on her. Do you have anything to say? What's the terrain like? Diane asked. The courtroom went silent. Even the crying stopped. Excuse me. Brith's mandibles clicked in confusion. The terrain, on this Moorhaven place. Is it jungle? Desert? Mountains? I'm just curious about the terrain. Brith stared at her for a long moment. Then he made a sound that might have been a laugh, though it was hard to tell with insectoids. Is jungle human? Endless jungle. Class Black Zone designation. 98% fatality rate within the first standard year. The planet itself is your prison, your guard, and most likely your executioner. Diane nodded slowly, processing this information. Jungle. Okay, good to know. They led her away while the other prisoners watched her like she had lost her mind. In the holding cell, a thin alien with gray skin and too many joints in his fingers grabbed her arm through the bars. You are insane, he whispered. Moorhaven 6 is where they send people to die, not to serve time. 2D. No one survives. Diane gently removed his hand from her arm. Someone must survive. You said 98% die. That means 2% don't. That 2% just means they haven't found the bodies yet. Diane smiled. It wasn't a happy smile, but it wasn't afraid either. I grew up in Alaska. You know what Alaska is? It's a place on Earth where everything freezes solid for half the year. Where bears the size of ground vehicles want to eat you. Where one wrong step means falling into water so cold your heart stops in seconds. The alien just stared at her. I spent 3 weeks lost in the Yukon wilderness after a plane crash, Diane continued. No supplies. No rescue coming. Temperatures that would kill most species in minutes. I walked out on my own 2 feet. This is different. Moorhaven 6 is a jungle, Diane finished. Jungles have food. Jungles have water. Jungles have shelter materials everywhere you look. Your Black Zone death world sounds like a vacation compared to the Yukon in January. The transport ship came for her the next day. The pilot was a nervous creature with scales and trembling hands. He kept checking his instruments like he expected them to explode. I don't land on Moorhaven 6, he said without looking at her. No one lands. Orbital drops only. The survival pod will cushion your fall. After that, you're on your own. Diane looked out the viewport as the planet came into view. It was green. Impossibly, entirely green, except for the flashes of bioluminescent storms that crackled across the surface like electric veins. Beautiful, in a deadly sort of way. How long do most people last? She asked. The pilot finally looked at her. His eyes were wide with something between pity and confusion. Hours, sometimes days. The longest anyone lasted was 3 weeks, and that was a trained military officer with combat experience. 3 weeks. Diane nodded to herself. That's not bad. What killed him? Everything. The plants eat you. The animals eat you. The weather kills you. The water poisons you. The air carries spores that grow in your lungs. Take your pick. The survival pod was small, barely large enough for her body and a tiny supply kit. 72 hours of rations. A fire starter. A small blade. Basic medical supplies. Not enough to survive on, just enough to make you think you might die. As they position her over the drop zone, Diane took one last look at the pilot. "Hey," she said, "when they ask about me later, tell them something for me." The pilot paused, his claw hovering over the release switch. "Tell them the trails better be more interesting than they look from up here." Then the pod dropped, and Diane Holloway fell toward the deadliest jungle in the known galaxy with a smile on her face. The green rushed up to meet her. Wind screamed past the pod. Warning lights flashed as the atmosphere caught fire around her. Diane closed her eyes and remembered the Yukon. The cold, the silence, the absolute certainty that nothing was coming to save her. She had survived that. She would survive this. The pod crashed through the canopy with a sound like thunder, and everything went dark. When Diane opened her eyes, she was surrounded by green. Things moved in the shadows. Something screamed in the distance. She checked her body for injuries, found none, and climbed out of the smoking pod. The jungle stretched in every direction, endless and hungry. Diane Holloway took a deep breath of alien air and smiled. "All right," she said to no one in particular. "Let's see what you've got." Something was growing toward her. Diane had been on Moor Haven 6 for exactly 4 minutes, and already the ground was moving. Thick vines crept across the jungle floor, reaching for the heat of her body like blind fingers searching in the dark. The plants here didn't wait for you to die. They came to collect. She grabbed her supply kit and ran. The clearing where her pod had landed was shrinking fast. Trees that had seemed distant were suddenly closer. Root systems bulged up from the soil, creating walls where none had existed moments before. The jungle was alive in a way that Earth jungles never were. It thought, it planned, it hunted. Diane pulled out her fire starter and sparked a flame against dry bark from her kit. The moment the smoke rose, the plants retreated. Not far, but enough. They didn't like smoke. Good information. She filed it away in her mind and kept moving. For the next 6 hours, she walked. Not in any particular direction, just away from where things were moving toward her. She watched everything. The way insects avoided certain water pools. The paths worn into the undergrowth by larger creatures. The sounds that meant danger versus the sounds that were just noise. The prison authority had mentioned trails. She found them by accident. Faint paths marked with old bones and rusted equipment. Signs in a dozen languages warned prisoners to stay on the designated routes. Diane laughed out loud when she saw them. The trails were a joke. Overgrown, poorly planned, running straight through predator territory. They were designed by someone who had never walked them, probably designed from orbit, using maps instead of experience. Anyone who followed these trails would be dead within days. She ignored them completely and started reading the jungle instead. By nightfall, she had found a water source. Not the obvious stream the trails led to, which was surrounded by the tracks of large predators. Instead, she found a rocky outcrop where condensation collected in natural bowls. The insects avoided the predator stream, but drank from these rocks. If the water was safe for the local life, it was probably safe for her. She built her sleeping platform high in the canopy, using techniques she'd taught students back on Earth. The trees here had different bark, different branch patterns, but physics was physics. Weight distribution worked the same everywhere in the universe. On her second day, she met her first stalker. The creature emerged from the undergrowth without a sound. 6 legs, body the size of a large bear, skin that shifted colors to match its surroundings, eyes that tracked her with intelligent patience. This was no mindless predator. This thing was smart. Every instinct screamed at her to run. Diane stayed perfectly still. She had heard something earlier that morning, a deep barking sound that echoed through the trees. Territorial calls, she had guessed. Predators marking their hunting grounds. She opened her mouth and made the same sound. Not perfect, but close enough. The stalker stopped moving. Its head tilted to one side, studying her. Those intelligent eyes narrowed. Diane barked again. Louder this time, more confident. For one terrible moment, she thought she had made a fatal mistake. The stalker's muscles tensed. Its claws dug into the soil. Then it circled her. Once, twice, 3 times, like it was trying to figure out what she was. After an hour of this strange standoff, the stalker turned and vanished back into the jungle. Not fleeing, just leaving. Like it had decided she wasn't worth the trouble. Diane let out a breath. She didn't know she'd been holding that on day 2. She found the bodies. Most prisoners never made it more than 100 meters from their drop pods. She counted 11 corpses in various states of decay, all clustered around a designated trail marker. They had followed the signs. They had trusted the system. The system had killed them. Diane took what supplies she could salvage: a working flashlight, extra ration packs, a length of synthetic rope, and kept moving. By afternoon, she found something unexpected: a survivor. The alien was small, barely reaching her waist. Reptilian features. Scales that had once been green, but were now gray with exhaustion and fear. He was huddled in a hollow beneath a fallen tree, shaking so badly his teeth rattled. Diane approached slowly, hands visible. "Hey, you alive?" The alien's eyes went wide. "Human? You're human? How are you still alive?" "Stubbornness, mostly." Diane crouched down to his level. "What's your name?" "Goss. My name is Goss. I was an accountant. I exposed corruption in a mining guild. They sent me here to die." His voice cracked. "I've been here 3 weeks." 3 weeks? Diane was impressed despite herself. "That's longer than anyone the pilot told me about. How'd you manage it?" "I hid. In this hole. I had rations. The rations ran out 2 days ago." Goss looked at her with something like hope. "Do you have food? Please. I haven't eaten in 2 days." Diane opened her pack and handed him a ration bar. Goss devoured it like he'd never seen food before. "Thank you. Thank you so much." Tears ran down his scaled face. "You should leave me here. I'll only slow you down. This planet will kill us both." Diane stood up and offered him her hand. "The planet isn't trying to kill you personally, Goss. It's just a jungle doing jungle things. Stop taking it so personally." Goss stared at her hand like it might bite him. "You're insane." "Probably." Diane kept her hand extended. Coming or not, Goss took her hand. Together, they walked deeper into the jungle that had killed everyone else. Diane was still smiling. Goss screamed at everything. The rustle of leaves made him scream. The call of distant animals made him scream. His own shadow made him scream so loud that Diane had to cover his mouth before something actually dangerous heard them. "You need to calm down," she said firmly. "Screaming attracts predators. Silence keeps you alive." "I can't help it," Goss whimpered. "Everything here wants to eat me. Everything everywhere wants to eat something. That's how nature works. You just need to learn which things are actually dangerous and which things are just noise." For the next week, Diane taught him. She showed him how to read animal paths. Wide paths with broken branches meant large predators. Narrow paths with droppings meant prey animals. Follow the prey paths. Avoid the predator routes. Simple. She taught him about water. Moving water was usually safer than still water. But watch for discoloration. Watch for dead insects floating on the surface. Watch where the local creatures drink and drink there too. She taught him about sound. High-pitched screams usually meant small prey dying, not a threat. Low rumbles meant large predators communicating. Move away quietly. Silence meant something big was hunting nearby. Freeze and wait. Goss learned slowly, but he learned. "Why do you know all this?" he asked one night as they sat around a small fire in a concealed pit. The flames were low, barely visible, just enough for warmth without attracting attention. Diane stared into the fire. "I grew up in Alaska. That's a region on Earth, far north. Cold most of the year. Dangerous all of the year. My father was a trapper. My mother was a ranger. They taught me to survive before I could read. And you became a survival instructor for 15 years. Taught people from cities how not to die in the wilderness. Rich people mostly. They'd pay good money to learn how to build a fire or find water." She smiled at the memory. "Some of them were hopeless. Others surprised me." "I'm hopeless," Goss said quietly. "You're alive. 3 weeks on a black zone death world with no survival training. That's not hopeless, Goss. That's stubborn. Stubborn I can work with." On the 8th day, they encountered a thornback. Diane had heard about these creatures from the supplies she'd salvaged. Warnings etched into equipment. Notes left by dead prisoners. The thornback was Moorhaven SIX's most feared predator. It hunted by shooting paralytic spines from its back with terrifying accuracy. One hit meant you couldn't move. Then it fed. The creature appeared above them, perched on a thick branch. It was the size of a large dog, covered in sharp quills that glistened with venom. Its eyes locked on a Goss like he was already dead. "Don't move," Diane whispered. "What do we do?" Goss's voice was barely a breath. Diane had been watching Thornback for days. She'd noticed patterns. They always attacked from above. They always targeted prey that was standing or moving. She had never seen one attack anything that was already on the ground. "Get down, flat on your belly." Now, Goss dropped like a stone. Diane followed, pressing herself into the mud. The thornback's quills rattled. It shifted on its branch, confused. Its prey had vanished. Prey didn't do that. Prey ran. Prey climbed. Prey made itself a better target that IT didn't know what to do with creatures that simply disappeared. "Crawl," Diane murmured. "Slowly. Keep your body flat against the ground." They crawled for 2 kilometers through mud and rotting vegetation while the thornback circled overhead. It kept searching for them, but it couldn't find what it couldn't see. Eventually, it gave up and moved on to easier hunting grounds. When they finally stood again, Goss was covered in filth and shaking badly. But he was alive. "How did you know that would work?" he asked. "I watched them hunt. They're ambush predators. They need a clear shot from above. Take away the angle, you take away their advantage." Diane wiped mud from her face. "Every predator has a weakness. You just have to find it." That night, Goss asked the question she'd been expecting. "Why aren't you afraid?" Diane was silent for a long moment. The jungle hummed around them. Insects chirped. Something large moved through the canopy, far above. "I spent 3 weeks lost in the Yukon," she finally said. "My plane went down. Pilot died on impact. I had nothing. No food, no shelter, no way to call for help. Temperatures dropped to 40 below zero at night." Goss didn't know what that meant, but her voice told him it was bad. "I should have died 100 times during those 3 weeks. But I didn't, because I refused to. I kept moving, kept thinking, kept surviving. When they finally found me, the rescue team couldn't believe I was alive." She looked at Goss with steady eyes. "This planet is dangerous, but it's warm. It has food everywhere, water everywhere, building materials everywhere. Compared to the Yukon, Moorhaven, 6 is practically friendly." Goss stared at her for a long moment. Then he said something that made Diane laugh for the first time in days. "Your species is broken. You know that, right? Completely, fundamentally broken." "Probably," Diane agreed. "But being broken keeps us alive." The next morning, they discovered they weren't alone on Moorhaven. 6th, there was a settlement somewhere in the jungle. Not prisoners, guards. The ones who had crashed here years ago. The ones who had been abandoned. The ones who were now hunting prisoners for food. Diane's smile faded. "Goss," she said quietly, "I think our problems just got more complicated." The girl came crashing through the undergrowth like something was chasing her. Diane had her knife out before the noise stopped. Goss hid behind a tree, trembling as usual. But the figure that stumbled into their camp wasn't a predator. It was a human. Young, maybe 19 years old. Female, covered in scars and wearing clothes made from jungle plants woven together. Her eyes were wild with fear and something else, hope. "You're new," the girl gasped, dropping to her knees. "You new arrivals. I saw your fire last night. I've been tracking you since dawn." Diane didn't lower her knife. "Who are you?" "My name is Pip. I've been on this planet for 8 months." She looked over her shoulder nervously. "We need to move. Now. They'll be coming." "Who's they?" "The guards." Pip explained everything while they moved deeper into the jungle, away from the trails Diane already knew to avoid. The guard transport had crashed on Moorhaven 6 years ago. 40 guards had survived the impact. The penal authority had sent no rescue. No supplies. No communication. They had simply been abandoned, just like the prisoners they were supposed to watch. But the guards had military training. Equipment. Weapons. They had built a settlement near a geothermal vent, using the heat for power and protection. They had walls. They had organization. They had survived. The problem was how they survived. They raid the drop zones, Pip said, her voice flat and empty. Every time new prisoners land, they send hunting parties. They capture anyone they can, use them as labor, and when the labor runs out, she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. The penal authority knows? Diane asked. Of course they know. They just don't care. The planet kills most prisoners anyway. What difference does it make if some guards eat the rest? Pip laughed bitterly. We're not people to them. We're garbage. Thrown away and forgotten. Goss looked sick. How many prisoners are in their camp? About a dozen, last time I escaped. They keep them in cages. Barely feed them. Work them until they collapse. Pip's hands clenched into fists. I got out 3 months ago. Been surviving alone ever since. I thought I was the only free prisoner left on this planet. Diane was quiet for a long moment, processing everything. Point 40 guards. Armed and organized. A fortified settlement. Hunting parties that knew the terrain. Against them, one survival instructor, a terrified accountant, and a traumatized teenager. Those are workable odds, Diane said. Pip and Goss both stared at her. What? Goss squeaked. 40 of them, 3 of us, and a whole jungle that wants everyone dead. Diane smiled that smile that made Goss nervous. We don't have to beat them. We just have to let the jungle beat them for us. For the next 2 days, Diane scouted. She moved through the jungle alone, silent as a ghost, watching the guards' settlement from a distance. Pip had been right about everything. The walls were thick, made from Moorhaven timber. Guards patrolled the perimeter with actual weapons. The prisoner cages were visible near the center of the camp. But Diane saw things Pip had missed. The walls were made from local wood. That wood was still partially alive. She could see where new shoots were growing from the logs. The jungle was trying to reclaim the material, and the guards had to constantly cut it back. The guards themselves had grown soft. 6 years of relative safety had made them careless. They talked loudly. They moved predictably. They had forgotten what real danger felt like. And most importantly, Diane found the hunger vines. She had seen these plants before. They lay dormant most of the time, looking like ordinary vegetation. But during spore season, they came alive. The spores could smell blood from kilometers away. When they detected it, the vines grew at terrifying speed toward the source. Spore season started in 3 days, and on her last scouting run, Diane got close enough to see the prisoners in their cages. They were thin, broken, barely alive. Aliens and humans from a dozen different worlds, all sentenced to death for crimes that probably weren't crimes at all. Point one of them saw her. A young alien with 4 arms and exhausted eyes. Their gaze met across the distance. Diane put a finger to her lips. The prisoner nodded slowly, understanding. Hope flickered in those tired eyes for the first time in months. Diane returned to her companions as the sun set. I have a plan, she announced. Pip leaned forward eagerly. What kind of plan? The kind that uses everything this planet has taught us. Diane drew a rough map in the dirt. The walls are wood. The guards are lazy. And in 3 days, the spore season starts. Goss raised a trembling hand. What spore season? Remember how I told you some plants here are carnivorous? Diane's smile was not friendly at all. During spore season, they get hungry. Very, very hungry. Pip understood immediately. Her own smile matched Diane's. We're going to feed them to the jungle. Pip said, not quite. We're going to let the jungle do what it's been wanting to do for 6 years. Diane pointed at the map. Those guards think they've conquered this planet. They haven't. They've just been borrowing time. And I'm about to collect the debt. Goss looked between the 2 women with growing horror. You're both completely insane, he said. Probably, Diane agreed. But insane people survive longer on death worlds. Haven't you noticed? The planning began that night that in 3 days, the jungle would wake up hungry, and Diane intended to show it exactly where to eat. The first spore drifted past Diane's face like a glowing snowflake. She had spent 2 days preparing, collecting blood from cuts and scrapes, her own and her companions', finding the stalker dens within a kilometer of the guard camp, mapping the thornback territories, locating the largest grove of hunger vines she could find. Now, as the purple spores began filling the air, she knew the time had come. Remember the plan, she told Pip and Goss. Stage 1 starts at sunset. Stage 2, when you hear the screaming. Stage 3, when I signal. Goss was shaking so hard his teeth rattled. This is insane. We're going to die. We were always going to die, Diane said calmly. The question is whether we die for nothing or die for something. Now, get in position. Pip grabbed her arm before she could leave. What if this doesn't work? Then we'll improvise. That's what survival is, Pip. Controlled improvisation. Diane squeezed her shoulder. You've survived 8 months on a death world. Trust yourself. Pip nodded slowly. Then she disappeared into the jungle to take her position. Stage 1 began at sunset. Diane had created a trail using the collected blood. Just drops scattered across the ground, leading from the Hunger Vine Grove directly to the guard settlement. The spores could smell blood from kilometers away. Now, with spore season in full bloom, the vines began to wake. First, nothing seemed to happen. The blood dried on the soil. The spores drifted. The guards continued their evening routines, unaware of anything unusual. Then the ground began to move. The hunger vines grew fast. Incredibly fast. Diane watched from a safe distance as tendrils pushed through the soil, following the blood trail like dogs tracking a scent. Within an hour, the first vines reached the settlement walls. The walls were made from Moorhaven wood. Living wood. The hunger vines didn't attack the walls. They merged with them. Guards started shouting when they noticed new growth sprouting from their fortifications. They grabbed machetes and started cutting, but for every vine they severed, 3 more emerged. The walls themselves were becoming the enemy. Stage 2 began when the first thornback arrived. Pip had taken position on the western edge of the camp with a stolen communication device. She activated it at precisely the right frequency, the same frequency that thornbacks use to locate distressed prey. The first creature arrived within minutes. Then a second. Then a third. Guards scrambled for weapons. The thornbacks circled overhead, quills rattling, looking for clear shots. The guards had to choose between fighting the vines consuming their walls and fighting the predators circling their camp. They couldn't do both in the chaos. Diane moved. Stage 3 was the rescue. She and Goss approached through a drainage gap in the walls that the hunger vines had widened. The guards were too busy to notice 2 figures slipping through the shadows. Screaming filled the air. Thornback quills flew. Vines pulled at anything they touched. The prisoner cages were exactly where Pip had described. A dozen figures huddled inside, watching the destruction with disbelief. Goss, who had spent weeks learning from Diane, worked on the locks. His hands trembled, but he didn't stop. The accounting skills he'd once used to expose corruption now picked apart primitive locking mechanisms. "Come on," Diane whispered to the prisoners. Quietly, "Follow me." They were too weak to argue, too desperate to question. They simply followed. The group was halfway to the gap when Foreman Drell found them. He was a big alien, heavily scarred, with eyes that had seen too much violence. The leader of the guard camp for 6 years. The one who had made the decision to hunt prisoners for food when supplies ran low. "You," he snarled, pointing a weapon at Diane. "You did this." Diane didn't run. "The jungle did this. I just reminded it you were here. You think you understand this place." Drell stepped closer, finger on the trigger. "I've owned this planet for 6 years. Every predator fears me. Every movement behind him." The stalker emerged from the shadows like a ghost. The same stalker Diane had encountered during her first week. The one she had mimicked territorial calls at. The one she had been leaving food for ever since the IT had been following her for weeks. She had never tried to tame it. That would be stupid. Wild predators couldn't be tamed. But they could learn that certain creatures weren't threats. Certain creatures might even be useful. Drell sensed the presence behind him. He turned slowly, the stalker's intelligent eyes fixed on him with cold hunger. "I didn't conquer this jungle," Diane said quietly. "I made friends with it. You just made it angry." Drell ran. The stalker followed. Diane didn't watch what happened next. She led the prisoners through the gap, into the jungle, away from the screaming and destruction. The hunger vines continued their feast. The thornbacks continued their hunt. The guard camp that had terrorized prisoners for 6 years collapsed in a single night. By dawn, 18 prisoners had escaped. Pip found them in a clearing a safe distance from the ruins. Goss was already organizing them by species, checking injuries, distributing what supplies they had salvaged. It worked, Pip breathed. It actually worked. Diane looked at the ragged group of survivors. Aliens and humans from a dozen worlds, all condemned to death by a system that had forgotten they were people. This is just the beginning, she said. We need shelter, food, a long-term plan. She pointed deeper into the jungle. There's a crashed ship about 2 days from here. I found it during my scouting. If we can get its communication systems working, we might be able to call for help. Help! One of the rescued prisoners croaked. Who would help us? Diane smiled. Someone out there has to be paying attention. Let's make sure they hear us. She led them into the green. The jungle watched them go. For once, it didn't seem hungry at all. Rain fell on Moorhaven, 6 for the first time since Diane had arrived. The survivors huddled beneath the wreckage of the crashed survey vessel, watching water cascade through the jungle canopy. 2 weeks had passed since the guard camp fell. 2 weeks of building, salvaging, and learning to work together. The ship was old, 60 years old, according to the logs Pip had managed to access. A Confederated species survey vessel that had crashed while mapping the planet. The crew had disabled the distress beacon themselves, afraid it would attract predators. They had died anyway, but the ship remained, mostly intact, hidden under decades of jungle growth. And its communication array, buried under vines and rust, still had power. I think I got it, Pip announced, crawling out from a maintenance hatch. Her hands were black with grease, and her face was exhausted, but she was smiling. The array is working. We can broadcast. A murmur rippled through the survivors. Hope was a dangerous thing on a death world, but they couldn't help feeling it anyway. Diane stood in front of the communication console. 18 faces watched her. Aliens and humans from worlds she'd never heard of, all waiting for her to say something that mattered. This is Diane Holloway. She spoke into the ancient microphone. Prisoner 7741 Alpha. I'm broadcasting from Moorhaven 6, a Class Black Zone penal world. For 6 years, the guard station here have been hunting and killing prisoners. The Galactic Penal Authority knows about this and has done nothing. I'm transmitting evidence and coordinates. If anyone is listening, if anyone cares, we could use a ride. She paused, then added, the system sent me here to die. The system failed. I didn't. The message went out on every frequency the array could reach. Emergency channels, civilian bands, military frequencies, anything and everything. Then they waited 3 days of silence. Goss spent those days organizing their supplies with the precision of the accountant he used to be. Pip kept the array running and taught others basic repairs. The doctor among them, a quiet alien named Rel, treated injuries and illnesses with salvaged medical equipment. Diane walked the perimeter each morning, checking their defenses, reading the jungle's moods. The stalker appeared occasionally, watching from the tree line. She tossed it food, and it caught the offerings without approaching closer. They had an understanding now. Not friendship exactly. Mutual respect that on the 4th day, a ship appeared in orbit that it wasn't military. It wasn't the penal authority. It was a civilian vessel, small and fast, the kind used by independent operators who didn't like questions. The pilot's voice crackled through the repaired communication system. This is Winsure, freelance journalist. I've been investigating Black Zone facilities for 3 years. I've never found survivors before. Diane leaned toward the microphone. Congratulations. You found some. 18 of you? Really? On Moorhaven 6. 19, counting me. We had some disagreements with the local guard population. They're not guarding anymore. Silence on the other end. Then a laugh, short and disbelieving. I'm coming down. First shuttle in 30 minutes. The rescue ship could only take half of them at a time. 9 survivors crammed into the small shuttle, while 9 more stayed behind to wait for the second trip. Diane insisted on staying. Someone has to make sure everyone gets off, she explained. That means waiting until the last shuttle. Goss approached her as the first group prepared to leave. You saved my life, he said. All of our lives. I still don't understand how you did it. Diane looked at the jungle around them. Still dangerous. Still deadly. still beautiful in its terrible way. She had been here for less than 2 months, but it felt like years. This planet isn't special, Goss. It's just a place. A hard place, but just a place. Where I come from, we have 100 places like this. The difference is we don't drop people into them and call it justice. The shuttle lifted off with the first group. Diane watched it disappear through the clouds, carrying survivors towards something like freedom. When the journalist returned for the second group, she had questions. Your conviction will probably be overturned, when said as they prepared for departure. The evidence we're broadcasting is explosive. Corruption in the penal authority. Documented murders. This is going to be a massive scandal. Good. What will you do? When this is over, when you're free. Diane thought about it. She had been a survival instructor before all this, teaching rich people how not to die in the wilderness. It had been good work, but small, limited. I had a classroom, she said slowly. A few students at a time. Mostly people who would never need the skills I taught them. She gestured at the remaining survivors boarding the shuttle. Political prisoners. Whistleblowers. People who had committed the crime of inconvenience. I think I might need a bigger classroom. The shuttle lifted off. Moorhaven. 6 shrank beneath them, becoming just another green in an ocean of stars. Diane pressed her face to the viewport, watching the planet that had been meant to kill her fade into the distance. Somewhere down there, the stalker was probably wondering where its food source had gone. The hunger vines were dormant again, waiting for the next spore season. The thornbacks circled the ruins of the guard camp, finding nothing left to hunt. The jungle would continue. It didn't care about prisoners or guards or justice. It just existed, beautiful and terrible, doing what jungles do. But Diane Holloway had walked through it and survived. She leaned back in her seat and smiled. The trails on Moorhaven 6 really had been too easy. Next time, she'd have to find somewhere more challenging.